right, well, welcome everybody. Hey, Jeff and David Bush from Grow My Profit back for another great, extraordinary entrepreneur interview. We've got a great guest with all of you today. Somebody that Jeff has got some previous experience with, and so I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and have him introduce you to somebody that's done some really cool things for Jeff and his prior businesses. Jeff?
Yeah, so Jeff Bush, Grow My Profit. I think John and I probably met 8 years ago. And I think the reason that we met, to be honest, is a good friend of mine, my corporate attorney. He worked at Jones Day Law Firm, one of the top 5 in the world. And I called him on an issue with an employee, and he goes, Jeff, I'm your corporate attorney, and I charge you, $1,200 an hour. And he goes, you really need a labor law attorney, and suggested Fisher Phillips. And I don't know how I was lucky to find John as one of the many attorneys there, but that's how I met him. It was interesting to me that I had a really good attorney, really good friend who goes, dude, I don't specialize in labor law. You need a labor law attorney that knows his stuff. So I engaged John, and over a 10-year period, we worked through a few issues together with employees, lawsuits, overtime, meals and rest, disability. And we won 8 out of 10 cases, and the 2 cases that I lost didn't cost me that much money. And with 65 employees, that was a really good outcome. So John and I have some history together of just dealing with issues that pop up when you're growing a business and you got people, issues come up, labor law. So John's kind of the expert, and I've now referred him to a few of my friends, CEOs that are in my CEO group, and he's done a great job with them. Everybody's been really happy. So just super knowledgeable in this area of the law, and just a great person overall, just a nice guy. I like attorneys that are nice and reasonable, and not that have real short conversations because you're being billed hourly. No, just kidding. But John's a great guy and a great firm, and yeah. So that's my intro, both friend and my legal counsel on labor law stuff. So if that's enough, welcome to our show, John.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Dave.
Yeah, we're excited to dive in. We've got an audience of business owners that are wanting to scale their business 2 to 10x in the next 3 to 5 years. And as Jeff has mentioned, is that some of those fears of having lawsuits or having lots of employees and having labor law issues rob them of some of the success that they've created is sometimes the reason why they don't put in the extra effort, make the extra sacrifices, and scale their business. And so I know that you even mentioned when we were in the green room prior to kicking off this show that the cases that Jeff had to pay out on, that he maybe wouldn't have had those cases to begin with if he would have had a conversation with you prior to. So talk to these business owners that are watching this video right now, and give them some insights on things that you would say as an expert would be really valuable to address early on in the process to prevent labor law issues or lawsuits of the frivolous sort.
Sure. Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on. It's an honor and privilege to be here. I am with Fisher Phillips. We're a national labor and employment law firm, and on a day-to-day basis, I do talk to business owners, large and small. I know, Jeff, we're talking about a lot of Fisher Phillips, car dealership clients. We have a lot of those. Me personally, I have a lot of hospitality clients as well in the hotel industry. And if you didn't know, Jeff, and maybe for your audience, I worked in my dad's hotel management company prior to going to law school, small hotel management company, and working there and kind of understanding how a small business, has to run, looking at the bottom line and trying to just get by. So when I went to law school and I graduated, employment law and helping hoteliers seemed to fit. So a lot of my clients are hotels, like family-owned businesses with maybe 6, 7, 8 employees, right, that have employee issues that I counsel them on. And I think to answer your question, Dave, it would be being proactive when you know that there might be some employee who's being problematic. And I think business owners know who those employees might be. And when you don't know the lay of the land, you really need someone, competent employment counsel, to say, hey, this is where these landmines are, and this is how you avoid it. Because every time I get a lawsuit that comes in, whether it's a wrongful termination claim, wage and hour claim, you didn't pay me everything I'm owed, disability discrimination, retaliation, I can almost see exactly when maybe a different turn in the road would have prevented all of that. So don't try to rely on your own understanding. There's a lot of different things that can affect the strength of an employee's claim should they want to bring one. So don't hesitate to put a little bit in at the front end to try and avoid everything at the back end that you'd have to deal with.
Jeff, what were some of the challenges as a business owner that, looking back in retrospect, you would say, these are my top three that I would definitely encourage business owners to address on the front end based on your previous experience?
You know, I'm going to say something that I found out a few years ago, which was really interesting. 50% of all the CEOs of companies come out of the sales side of the business. They're good salespeople. They're marketers. They become business owners because they don't want to work for someone else. Those 50% of CEOs that came out of sales are probably 90% of the ones that get sued because they don't want anything to do with compliance. They don't like it. They don't want anything to do with HR. So they're running their business on sales and marketing, me included. I'm a sales guy to start with who owned a company, a few companies, and built them pretty big. You know, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they're from the engineering side of the business. I bet you the engineers don't get sued as much because they dot their I's and cross their T's. Okay, I'm just saying that it's one of my weaknesses and I realize it. I am not a good compliance person. So one of the things that I did is relied on people like John, people like, PEO, private employment organization. I mean, I had 65 employees at one company, 70 at another. I've got 5 right now, 140 at the first company, and I knew I wasn't qualified to do it. So, I leaned on, people. One of the most important things I would say starting out, and John didn't mention it, but I know he'll agree, is employee manual. Pretty important when you sign them up, a non-compete, which what now is illegal in California, which is crazy, right? A non-compete, a non-disclosure, an arbitration agreement. I mean, the first day they start, you want something signed that is clear. And then obviously along the way, right now in California, craziness, tracking hours, overtime, meal, and rest period. If you're not tracking hours, and what was so sad is I had 30 salespeople at the mortgage company, 25 at the direct mail company, 40 at the prior ad agency. No salesperson wants to track hours. I'm a salesperson. I'm on commission. Well, no, you're not. You're in California. So we need to track your hours and pay you minimum wage and overtime and take meal and rest period. Even though you're a salesperson, you're not independent. You're not running your own show. And I've got to protect myself. So anyways, I'm thinking employee manual, tracking hours, and then, before you sit down with the employee and fire them in a rage of fury, right? Like call John first. Verbal warning, written warning, fire. Don't run your business off emotion. That seems to get a lot of people in trouble. And the class actions and the PAGA lawsuits, I don't know. I wasn't good at it and I knew that and I didn't want to do it. So I paid a lot of money and time to dedicate to my business to get professional help because I knew I wasn't good at it, and I think that a lot of the CEOs that I know that are getting sued, $1 million class action lawsuits, they weren't doing it right. Like their egos told them they could do it, but swallow your ego and go get the right people in your corner to do all this stuff. That would be my biggest thing. And like I said, I'd love to know the ratio. 50% of CEOs came out of sales. I guarantee they have 90% of the lawsuits because they're not dotting I's, crossing T's because they don't like. Most salespeople are not good with paperwork. If I'm a CEO of a big company and I'm not good at paperwork, shame on me. I better find someone who is, or have somebody that's really on my team watching my back, making sure along the way. I remember the day that I found out I'm paying my salespeople minimum wage, $35,000 a year, tracking hours. That's great. Paying overtime, right? Then I found out, hey, the guy that's making $50,000 a month in commissions, that's subject to time and a half. Imagine commissions, time and a half on commissions. I remember when I found that out, I was in shock. So not only do you have to pay time and a half on their wage, time and a half on commissions. And it's things like that that I just have no clue. And John's reading, the laws are changing every 6 months, especially in California. I'm not sitting there watching labor law rules change and, AB this, AB 47, AB 190. I mean, it's happening so fast. If you don't have someone like literally on payroll with a retainer no wonder why people don't want to go from one employee to 100, or they want to
That's one of
stay
the reasons
small.
why
But
you chose to do the PEO, Professional Employment Organization, was to take some of that risk off of your plate. John, if a company doesn't have a PEO that they're working with, what are some of those initial things that they should be setting up as processes and protocols, like an employee handbook and some other things that a PEO would just be providing to you as part of their payment plan?
Sure. No, PEOs are helpful, right? They can take all the administrative things off of your plate when it comes to benefits, processing payroll. What they don't necessarily do is, take away all your liability. Typically, there's sort of a joint relationship in most circumstances. So you still need to make sure that you're, dotting your I's and crossing your T's. But I do think if you don't have a PEO and if that's not an option for you, employee handbook is the first place you start, like Jeff said. That gives you the nice baseline of policies that are going to protect you from the perspective of, wage and hour things like meal and rest periods and overtime, leaves of absences, vacation pay,
COVID, COVID.
COVID.
Oh,
God,
geez, we went through COVID with 65 employees. That was crazy, you know?
everybody's hair was on fire during
Yeah.
COVID. And those types of things in a handbook are a good place to start. Now, where most people are going to get in trouble, and I think this goes to Jeff's point, is if you're a startup, and I've represented a lot of startup companies who grow fast, right? If you have a good startup and you need a lot of people, you're just worried about who can I hire, where do I get all the money, right? You're not thinking about how am I paying these people, and am I complying with all the provisions I need to, especially in California, as you said, Jeff. Are my people classified properly? And I think I'll just point out, whether someone is exempt or non-exempt is really important. And one of the misconceptions that I see a lot is, well, I got this salesperson who is selling stuff for me, and they're in a they're in a decision-making role, so to speak, with my customers. I'm just going to pay them a salary or just pay them on commission. And that's a big problem in California and in some other states where you might still have to pay that person overtime. And Jeff kind of referenced this too, because if they're misclassified and you just pay them all commission and you don't track their time, you can get stuck with a huge lawsuit. And not only as to that person, but maybe even all the other people who are classified that same way. That's a very expensive lawsuit to deal with. And you're sort of caught, for lack of a better word, with your pants down if you did it wrong, So make sure you set that up right from the get-go. And if you're thinking grow, make sure you do those things properly.
Oh, I love the people that have like, oh, I've got 20 independent contractors out there selling, and well, they only work for you. They have no other clients. They're not incorporated. Those are employees, right? That's the ABC test. That's a
Yeah.
big deal. Everybody's trying to get away with not paying benefits, not paying payroll taxes. I get it. It's expensive. I mean, my payroll costs me 20%. If my payroll is 100 grand a month, it costs me 120,000 just in payroll taxes, insurance, benefits. But you can't run around having all these independent contractors. They'll be the first one to sue you, right? It's like that's probably a big deal to look at independent contractor agreements and see if if they're right,
Yeah.
It's
Is there a
very, very hard.
checklist of sorts, John, that you would say like, hey, small business owners, here's the 5-point checklist of the 5
Right.
things that you should be making sure that you are confirming are in play? Like, does my hiring practices conflict with discrimination laws? Or, I
Like
mean,
an audit,
yeah,
a little miniature audit.
is there a checklist or something that you provide to small business owners to kind of give them some rails to run on? Because like most of the people that start a small business is that most of them are, like Jeff said, they're salespeople or they're technicians that are really good at, working on widgets. And so they decide to open up and put their shingle out, and then they start hiring staff without even thinking about all of the compliance factors. So where would they go for that checklist of things?
Yeah, I mean, we have one pagers that we can send out to prospective clients and current clients, depending on what sort of business they're in. And it really does depend, right? What do you do, and what is it that you're going to need to focus on, depending on the industry, depending on your workforce. So it's something that I could pretty quickly identify for someone and say, hey, these are the top 5, 6 things you should do. One of the things, if you do have non-exempt employees, and staff that are clocking in and out for you. When it comes to dealing with meal and rest periods, when it comes to tracking all the hours that they work, those issues always come up. And if I were to say what the most common wage and hour issue is, it's meal periods and rest periods. And before I became a lawyer, I said, why would anybody be talking about meal periods? Just we're adults, let's eat lunch. Nobody's stopping you from eating lunch. But it's in every single claim that I get from a plaintiff's lawyer to say, yeah, my guy was wrongfully terminated. Oh, by the way, he didn't get his meal periods and his rest periods either. So you always have to make sure, and I'd probably tell every client this, make sure that you are doing everything you can to have those non-exempt employees clock in and out, not only when they get in at the beginning of the day, but for their lunches and at the end of the day, and that their lunches are within the requirements of the labor code or whatever state you're in, where there is a requirement to have that full 30 minutes and that it's taken at the right time. Because if you don't, again, it's another issue that they hang their hat on to try and extort more money out of you.
Is that nationwide, or is that more specific to a specific state or region?
It's
Comes to
California, definitely. There is no meal and rest period requirement on a federal level, and it's going to depend on what state you're in if there are going to be other meal and rest period requirements.
Nice.
But definitely in California.
So most of our clients are utilizing, or the people that are watching this video are looking at scaling their sales team. So what are the key definitive factors of what makes an exempt employee, and how to determine whether or not you can call them an independent contractor and an exempt employee, or whether you have to do the meal and rest and all that?
Sure. Well, the first question is whether or not an employee of yours, if it's a salesperson, is an employee or an independent contractor, right? That's going to be the first overarching question. And if you're controlling that person, if you're providing them the tools for them to do their job, if you're paying them
cell phone and laptop.
yeah, you're providing that stuff for them, and you treat them like an employee, then they're probably going to be an employee. If you're in California, it's very hard to make someone an independent contractor. The ABC test has really clamped down on the ability to just call someone a contractor, and it's mainly the B prong of that test. There's three requirements, and the B prong essentially says that the employee cannot, the person, the worker, cannot be performing work that is within the usual course of your business. So think about how broad that is, right? So if they are doing something that is your business, they cannot be a contractor, at least in California. So the classic example, of course, is you have a plumber come to your business. They can be a contractor because they're not doing what your business is. But if you're selling widgets, if your business is to make widgets and sell them, and they're selling your widgets, they cannot be a contractor. That's it. That's the end of the analysis. So most salespeople are going to have to be employees unless there's some exemption. Once you're an employee, then you can get into whether or not you're actually exempt from overtime, meal and rest periods. And then you get into the discussion of, is there an applicable exemption that would make my sales guy someone that I can pay a salary, right? And not have to pay them hourly. Or I can pay them maybe on a commission only basis based on their sales. But there has to be an exemption. Some of those include an outside sales exemption. That one's great because that means that there are actually no requirements from a salary perspective. The requirements for an outside salesperson are you got to spend more than 50% of your time out of an office, out of your home, actually selling. And you have to make more than 50% of your compensation from commissions.
So is an independent contractor and an outside salesperson different classifications?
Yeah. So once you start talking about whether you're outside sales exempt, you have to be an employee, right? You're an employee. If you're a contractor, then these exemptions don't really apply to you because you're independent. You're a contractor, so you don't have to be classified in one of these exemptions because you're not going to be paid overtime anyway if you're a contractor, right? But once you're an employee, you got to find an exemption for that person. And an outside sales exemption might be one, and it's actually a powerful one if it applies. Most of the time, it's hard to get into that bucket though, and if you don't get in that bucket or other ones, then overtime applies, and all the other requirements under the law. There's also an inside sales exemption. There are other requirements for that, but that only applies to retail services in California, not any other industry. So it is limited. And then you got to go to what we call white collar exemption. So lawyers, doctors, right? People who fall under administrative or professional or executive exemption, then you can pay those people salaries if you meet the test. So again, the default, I think I'll just say for your listeners, the default is everybody has to be paid overtime and get meal and rest periods unless you can show there's an exemption for them. So make sure you can pinpoint that without just throwing guys out there to go sell stuff and paying them a salary.
Yeah, I remember when I had, let's say I had 30 salespeople on minimum wage and it was $32,000 a year, and they raised minimum wage by $1. I'm like, okay, $1 to, oh crap, that's going to cost me $40,000 a year more. I got to bump everybody up in sales by $40,000. And then the managers, the law in California, I don't know if this is federal, is you have to double minimum wage. So my salary people go from making 62,000 a year to 68,000. And that's just right out of the company's pocket. So guess what I did? Price increase. The price of our product just went up to pay for all this labor. And I justified my price increase by, we got to pay more minimum wage, salaries. You know, it was a little tricky, but it's doable, you know, but I'm trying to hold on to 20% net profit to the bottom line. So if my company did $20 million in sales, I'm trying to make $4 million. And every one of these things is eaten into that. You know, take 100 grand from Jeff here, take 100 grand here. Eventually you're doing all this stuff, making no money. So it's like price increases were so crucial along the way to justify. I'm becoming, you know, legal fees, put that in there, right? I'm going to have some legal fees as I grow. And I don't think business owners always really plan for that, you know, but you got to put that in there. It's part of the forecast. And it, you know, you're going to spend a few hours working out some of these problems. That's just part of running a business, you know. And you know, I was just thinking, I just said 50% of all CEOs in America come from the sales side. I bet you in the car dealer world, it's 70%. I can't tell you how many owners of car dealerships I've talked to that started on the line selling cars. So they were car salespeople, and it amazes me. These guys are worth $100 million now, and they own one dealership or 10 dealerships. It's pretty cool how you could be a salesperson at a car dealership, which is not the most high position in the world. Next thing you know, you own 5 dealerships, you're making $5-10 million a year. It's kind of cool when you think about moving from sales to owner, you know, in America. But I bet you on the car dealer side, a lot of them started in sales. That's where they learned it and then worked their way up, or unless they're the son and inherited the dealership, right? That's common too, is family, you know, turn. So anyways, kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I'll say too, you know, Jeff, to that point, for a lot of these guys who went from sales guy to owner, they're very familiar with pay plans, right? And a pay plan is exactly what you need if you have a sales guy who's making commission. In California, it's required. Other states may not be required, but highly recommended to outline exactly not only what the commission is, but what are the legal terms and what are the obligations of both the employee and the company to pay out those commissions. And those are always battles. Those are battles on when did you earn the commission, right? You fire somebody, are you entitled to that sale, or did that sale close, right?
Did he do 50% of the work because he or she's entitled to 50% of the commission? I remember that. Yeah.
The splits, chargebacks, right? What about chargebacks? If a sale gets undone, can you pull that back from the employee? And do you want to think about that before you craft that commission plan? So, you know, Fisher Phillips and I, you know, we do these all the time to just make sure, again, that you're looking at all of those issues, and that you don't get stuck somewhere where you might be in a bad spot later. So on the front end, get those pay plans done and then tell your workforce how you're going to pay them.
I remember when I had my offer letters, all 65 employees signed an offer letter. And I think one day I sent it, he goes, send me your offer letter. I sent it to John. He's like, are you kidding me? Like, you're missing this. And now I'm like, crap. Like, and that was an offer letter I think I got from my PEO. Maybe it was just a national blank template. And he's like, you're in California. You need to do, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I was kind of embarrassed that I was out of compliance, and I worked pretty hard at trying to stay compliant. It's just difficult when you're on your own. So another thing I wanted to bring up, when I sold the ad agency, I don't know if you've ever been through due diligence. They say it's similar to an enema, right? It's a colonoscopy. I mean, these guys, oh my God, it was like 200 hours of due diligence. If they would have found in their due diligence, oh, Jeff didn't pay these 65 employees correctly, deal's done. Due diligence, you got $1 million class action coming. We don't want to buy this company. So if somebody's looking to sell, so important to clean it up, because every skeleton comes out of that closet. And I had a couple just stuff that I forgot about or I didn't do. And so if you're looking to build a company and sell it, you want that thing clean as a whistle, and luckily when they did due diligence, everything was clean and settled and there wasn't all this. So I wonder, if I sold the company and then they came back and had $1 million class action lawsuit, they're going to claw back money from me or try to, right? And so anybody that's planning on building a company to sell it, even more important to keep it clean, because that can kill your sale. That
Yeah, how
could
much of
even
that, John, how much of that can transfer with a company after
liability.
after an asset sale or after they sell their company? I mean, does it go with the actual business, or is that business, if it's sold off, does that terminate any ability to come back to a company?
Yeah, I've been involved in some of those sales from an employment law perspective. Now I don't do the transactional side of things, but it's going to depend on what they're purchasing. And sometimes they will purchase all liability if they're purchasing a company and take that on. In most cases, they'll say no. But you do want to have, to Jeff's point, you want to be able to tell them, look, I have Fisher Phillips representing me. Here's my employee handbook. Here are the pay
Yeah.
plans. We're clean as possible, right? From an employment law perspective, it really goes a long way. So that's, if you're still going to be on the hook and you're not selling those liabilities whenever you sell your business, you do need to be aware. Now, one of the ways, and I'll say this, one of the ways you can reduce your liability going forward too are severance agreements. And I think those are probably, one of the few ways that you can really kind of stamp out any potential liability is by paying a little money on the front end to get what we call a general release of claims from that employee. And, if you're just needing to separate from an employee and want to discuss the option of getting that release signed, or if it's a sale and you're, laying off the entire workforce, think about providing a little money to each of them and say, look, we're sorry we have to let you go, but here's a little money. We just need you to sign this release. And again, even if you think you're clean, having that peace of mind so that a disgruntled person doesn't find a lawyer and try to sue you really does help. And those are pretty ironclad, at least our agreements are, and you don't have to worry about that going forward.
Does Fisher Phillips act in such a way where small business owners can have them be somewhat on retainer to organize the employee handbook and provide regular ongoing audits to protect the business owner? Or is it more just based upon when you have a problem, then you reach out to Fisher Phillips?
It's both. I have a lot of my clients, they're on a quarterly advice retainer. They pay a flat fee and they have access to me and any other Fisher Phillips attorney for day-to-day advice. And whatever advice we give is within that retention amount. Other clients who don't want to do that will simply say, I'll call you when I need you. And we're available to do that as well. So it really depends on your specific situation and what the company wants or needs. But we have a lot of flat fee arrangements for handbooks or new hire packets. And really we can tailor a lot of that stuff whenever needed.
All right, I got 7. I'm going to put you on the hot seat, John. I know that you graduated cum laude, so you're a brilliant guy, but I'm going to put you on the hot seat and I'm going to bring up 7 topics. And I want you to give the best tip or to ask the best question of a person watching this video that would help them take a good step in the right direction. So the first one is wage and hour laws. What would be your best tip or your best question to a business owner that would help them to protect themselves from lawsuits in that category.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about some of that already, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I do think when it comes to, if you have a non-exempt sort of workforce, tracking time appropriately and making sure that all time is paid, and that you're looking at meal periods and rest periods and overtime properly. I mean, that's just basic level stuff. And I'll say to all the California folks that, in California, meal periods are proving that you've provided meal periods. That's the employer's burden to show. And a lot of my clients like to say, well, they didn't tell me they didn't get it. And that's not good enough, right? You have to show that you gave it to them, right? And that there's some sort of trail to show that it wasn't denied. So really take that on strongly. And if you have a office person or an HR person to do that, they got to look at those time cards on a pay period basis and make sure everything looks good. That's really the point that I would make on that.
Hey,
All
the
right.
biggest one I ever heard of that was kind of shocking to me, and I think because it's all public information, we can talk about it, but you might have a better one, John. I remember when State Farm got sued for overtime, and it was like $440 million, and it was the insurance adjusters. Oh, they're all independent contractors. We're good. I'm thinking, dude, State Farm screwed up, and it was like 440 million. There's probably been bigger one than that. What's the best story you got on overtime? They're not really employees. I don't have to track their hours. Is there any good ones that are public information that people can Google? Because you're thinking, I'm like, State Farm screwed up that bad? That was kind of funny to me, but oops.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird. I mean, a lot of those come up in the context of either the law changing, right, or an issue
Right.
where plaintiffs' attorneys are trying to push the issue. And I could point to Uber, right? I mean, Uber,
Oh,
you have drivers
geez.
who they say are independent contractors. I think most of those drivers want to be independent contractors, yet there were some laws that changed, and all of a sudden there's a whole class action lawsuit, right, against Uber,
Oh,
and Uber's
geez.
fighting it, spending hundreds of millions of dollars, right,
Oh,
to
geez.
get a determination from a court, because it's a gray area and nobody knows. So you really have to be in a position, in a strong position, and when it comes to exemptions and classifications that you can justify. And I always advise my clients, of course, to be more conservative with that, because it's just not worth it, right, to go the other way.
I don't know if you guys have just seen recently that the NCAA has just approved for the first time in collegiate history to pay players to from the university funds to play an athletic sport,
It's
and
crazy.
now they're the employee or the players are actually wanting to become an employee so that they can actually unionize. And
Oh,
can you imagine
geez.
having every college,
Jeez.
every Division I college that is paying their students to play a sport, that they actually now become an employee and they have time
Oh,
cards?
geez. So
Right.
much for a Hell Week 2-a-days, right? That's out of the
That's
question.
out.
We got to pay overtime
Right.
now on
Right.
2-a-day, Hell Week. That's funny. That's crazy.
All right, fast and furious. Employee handbook and policies. What's your best tip?
Get a compliant handbook in place, and make sure it's up to date. Don't put in a handbook in place that's from your uncle's cousin back
Yeah.
from 2017. Get a new one. Get it in place so it's right. Because if that's wrong, then you're really going to be starting off on the wrong foot. So
Employee medical conditions and family leave.
wow, yeah, I could talk about that for hours.
There's an hour webinar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know if you want an hour webinar on that or interview on that. But I think I'll say, when it comes to employees who have medical conditions, be very careful in how you deal with those. But, most importantly, I think employers forget to engage in what's called the interactive process with those employees. So an employee says, hey, I have a medical condition, I need to be out for 2 months, or I have this, back issue and I have to take work off, I don't know, 5, 10 hours out of the week. In either situation, the employer has to show in writing that you've actually engaged with that person to say what the employer can or can't do. So if you can't provide the accommodation, tell them up front and figure out a way to work with them on it. Don't just say no out of hand. Because if you do that, that's just straight evidence that there is some sort of animus towards that person, some sort of discrimination for a plaintiff's lawyer to look at. So if you remember anything about that, which there's a lot more to talk about
Yeah.
ADA and FMLA, just remember to engage with that employee and I would give an employment attorney a call otherwise.
How about termination and disciplinary actions? Jeff made comments to written notice, second notice. What's your best policy there?
Sure. As to discipline, you got to be consistent, and you want to make sure that you're advising the employee of what their shortcomings are, if there are any. It's very hard to do, right? You want to be the nice guy. You don't want to go to someone and say, this is where you're falling short. But that's where you get in trouble. And it's important that you have a good record of discipline or write-ups, something in writing. Verbal, coaching is usually not very helpful. So you want it in writing, and you got to be, again, consistent across the board. The last thing I'll say on sort of disciplinary actions and terminations is the biggest misconception out there is that because an employee is at will, that you don't have to give them a reason when you fire them. I still have attorneys tell me, well, no, why would they give a reason for terminating the employee? And I'm like, because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to show that that's the reason you did it in the first place. So at will doesn't protect anybody from a lawsuit. You have to be able to give a legitimate, non-discriminatory, non-retaliatory reason at the outset. And if you don't do it then, the judge or the jury is going to say, well, if you're saying it now, later, why didn't you just say it back then when you fired him, right? If that was the true reason. So you don't look credible if you don't give a reason and try to make up a reason later after you get sued.
Yeah, I love Jack Welch from GE, where he just wrote a line down the middle of the sheet of paper, and on the left-hand side, he wrote down all the things that he liked about what the person was doing. And then on the right side, he wrote down all the things that he wanted that person to improve. And that's with CEOs of many of the different companies that he worked with. But that was his strategy towards documenting what needed to improve, but also recognizing that it's not all bad. There's some positives there. Preventing and addressing harassment, or is it harassment? I don't know. And discrimination.
Niche or niche. Data or data. Love that one.
Well, and are you talking, Dave, you're talking about like complaints of harassment and discrimination, like from an employee or like internal
Just,
complaints?
yeah, preventing any opportunities for harassment or harassment and discrimination, and I guess dealing with it or addressing it if it does happen.
Yeah, I think it's making sure you have a zero tolerance policy in the workplace. And I kind of describe it like this: as a business owner, you don't have to identify whether something is actually harassment in the workplace, right? That's not the standard for you. The standard for you in the workplace should be, is that appropriate in the workplace or not, right? Was that joke appropriate for my business? Not, was that actually harassing her because she's female, or harassing this guy because he's older? And if there is something that's inappropriate, just address that, right? Address that with that person. If they have a management style that's bullying, make sure you stop that before you get to the point where it actually could be harassment. And don't ignore that stuff. Don't ignore something said from maybe your star salesperson, right? Making you a ton of money. If they say something inappropriate, don't shy away from addressing it with that person. You have to address it with them just as you would with the last person on your sales list who isn't selling very much, right? That consistency is really key.
So how would you address Michael Scott from The Office on some of the comments that he would make? No, I'm joking. Dispute resolution. What steps should I take to resolve employment disputes before they escalate to litigation? I know that's a big question, but
sure.
How do you avoid litigation with good conversation and communication, especially when there may be some hard feelings?
Yeah, don't get stuck in your ego, like Jeff said early. Talk to competent employment counsel early on and fully assess the risk. Because I think in a lot of cases, business owners might not take a course of action if they know that certain risk attaches to it. And there are other options to prevent it before it gets out of hand, including, like we talked about, maybe a severance agreement early on.
Yeah, my last one is emerging issues and trends. How do you stay on top of all of the things that are changing while you got your head down and you're growing your business?
Sure. Yeah, it's even hard for me sometimes to keep track of everything that goes on. I mean, internally at Fisher Phillips, we have a great legislative team that's really dialed in with Sacramento and even DC. But I would go on FisherPhillips.com. We have what we call our insights. You can click on that at the bottom of the homepage and just put your email in, and you'll get emails from us as to what the key issues are on a national scope level, in whatever state you're in. So I really encourage you to do that, so that you know what's going on.
I got a question for John before you end, if that was your
Yeah.
last one, Dave.
Yeah, go for it.
So weed smoking is now fully legal in California, but the stoners in my building that are running equipment, probably a bad idea for their safety and others. And I think about all the years that I had to do drug testing, and yeah, weed's legal now, but so is alcohol, and you can't come to work drunk, but you can come to work stoned. Medical marijuana, do they smoke all day? I'm just like, 10% of California is high all day, every day. I just took an Uber where the whole car smelled so much like weed. I was really nervous about his driving, and he was driving not good. And I can't tell you how many Ubers I've gotten into. Maybe it's where I live, Murrieta, California. Maybe they're just all stoned here. But these Uber drivers that are smoking weed, while driving is like frightening, right? Because I'm a pretty good driver, but I move cars around a lot and I have to take them. But I think about that in today. I mean, I sold my business 3 years ago. I had 35 guys in the warehouse and I had some pot smokers. And I don't know if you can drug test them, not hire them now, if they got a medical marijuana card. And this is going on all over the country. It's not just California. Just curious, just a general take on that without going in down rabbit holes. I have no issues right now, thank God. But if I was running a big company in California, I'd be a little worried about the whole marijuana legal medical card, all that. Is there some generalities there you could speak on?
Yeah, definitely. As to California, you can still maintain a policy that forbids an employee from being high at work.
Right.
Nothing has changed that yet, even though marijuana is legal. Um, California has changed how you can drug test employees. Um, it's still the same in terms of when you can do it. You can't do random drug tests. It has to be based on reasonable suspicion of drug use. So if you know there's a pot smoker who works for you and you smell it on him, right?
Send him home from work, go
You
make him get
can
drug tested.
you can drug test them. The only difference now is that you can't test them by using a specific drug test that will detect marijuana use months prior or weeks prior. Because
Oh,
everybody
interesting.
knows if you get tested for THC or marijuana, that will be in your system for a while. There's another test that's available now, which California now requires employers to use. And that tests, it doesn't test what you've done weeks prior. It actually identifies if you did it, today,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
The test is much more expensive, of course. Sacramento didn't really factor that into their legislation, but you can test them that way. That is legal to do. And you can say, no, you can't be high at work. That's still
Can I ask
allowed.
you a question? Let's say David and I have Grow My Profit, and we've got a business that said, hey, we want you guys to help us grow revenue. We're doing $1 million. We want to get to 50 million. We're going to hire 50 employees over the next 6 months, and we're like consulting for them. Can they legally drug test everyone and not hire them for weed or alcohol? Just out of curiosity. I mean, can you still drug test and say, hey, if you're a pot smoker, daily smoker, we don't want you to work here? I mean, I'm just, not to say that they would do that, but what's the rule? Because it used to be, I remember one lady, I gave her a drug test and she failed, and she was a really good salesperson. So I'm like, just go back in a couple weeks and test again. I just need a clean test. I don't care.
Uh-huh.
That was like 25, 30 years ago, but I'll never forget. I was at my high school reunion and the girls broke out a joint and I was laughing. Her excuse was hilarious. But, a lot of people do smoke, and a lot of them are really good salespeople. I don't know where the balance is there, but can you drug test people and not hire them if they're pot smokers or drinkers? I'm just curious, and if that law's changed.
Yeah, and with this change that happened January 1st of this year, that specific test wouldn't be permissible anymore, right?
Wow.
To
Wow.
actually test them that would track, and again, I can't remember the medical term, but it's the test that would, it remains in your system, and that's what it
Interesting.
tests. It has to
Yeah.
be the test that says, yes, you're high now. And a lot of my clients have just said, we're just going to do away with it and aren't testing for marijuana anymore.
Wow.
And are just doing it based on reasonable suspicion. Like you said, if, you smell it or their eyes are red, and
Yeah.
then sending them on those case by case scenarios. And I have some clients who are like, we can't hire anybody because everybody's testing positive for marijuana. So we just got rid of it.
It's true. It's an issue. It's an issue, you know? Okay, cool. That was just I was kind of curious just because we're out there growing some companies and that, like you said, if you have zero tolerance, it might be hard to find salespeople, right? Some of the best salespeople are a little bit bipolar and they drink or they smoke and, like whatever, if you can operate and do your job, like, I didn't really care. You go drink, go smoke, but you got to do your job. I wasn't I was pretty tolerating unless, not for my truck driver though, right? Driving the truck with all, 10,000-pound vehicle, you're like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be smoking weed. And even the next day, they're still a little fuzzy, right? So I don't know. I won't go down that road, but that was just a funny question for myself, for my own personal knowledge.
Yeah,
Sure.
we've opened up the can here today, and
Sorry.
it's obviously it can put some fear into a business owner about scaling, but with good representation, with good counsel, with good tools, with good structure, you can scale your business 2 to 10x in the next 3 to 5 years. And when those opportunities or those challenges come up, Jeff has, made mention, you got to have enough profit margin so you can have some challenges come up and not have it wreck your entire business plan because you had an employment lawsuit. So really good opportunity to reach out to John. We'll put John's contact information in the video description and the show notes of this particular session. John, any final words about ways that they can connect with you or work with you to get representation and have you at their disposal if they have a need or an interest?
No, I think I'll just say if you are interested in receiving updates from Fisher Phillips generally, but also, me privately, send me an email, and I'll add you to my list. During COVID and even since COVID, I've sort of sent my own updates to my clients and my contacts with things that I think are important. I'm sure Jeff has received some of those too, but again, just to stay abreast of the changes and some things you should think about, feel free to do that and email me, and I'm happy to add you to that.
Yeah, so breathe deep, business owners. If you heard some things today that maybe have got you thinking a little bit about your situation and about making some changes, reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to have dialogue with you, share some experiences, connect you with John personally. It's what it is that we do. So, Jeff, any final words before we wrap up?
No, we just covered a lot. I mean, exactly. I think there's a lot of benefit to this. I mean, I just got, $20,000 worth of free legal advice. I mean, John just covered a whole bunch of stuff. So I think, but he'll get some clients out of it. Some of our clients that need help, that are not buttoned up tight. We want to go alongside of them for a big exit, and we don't want the wheels to fall off the day of the exit, the big check, So I'm excited to kind of have John on our team and our clients team. There's a lot of value there. So hopefully people realize that. And, I was just thinking, I bought a $2 million house in Lake Elsinore and the air conditioner just broke and it's $15,000 and I'm pissed. And someone's like, well, Jeff, the rule, right? Like 3% of the house value in maintenance. That's 60 grand a year. You're only 15,000 in. It's fine. You're doing good, And I'm like, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. So when you're talking about scaling up a business, you put a certain percentage in there for legal and an audit. And as long as you're making enough margin and you're profitable, you just plan for these expenses. It's not like it's not like I say, I'm not going to buy the house now because I got maintenance fees. I got to paint it. I got to, repair stuff. So it's funny, like a business is kind of similar to a house in a way. You just plan for it. You got to put it in the budget and just know it's part of growing a big business, and you grow thicker skin through the years, right? You get a little tougher, going through all this stuff, and it kind of bugs you like, oh my gosh, I'm being sued. It's not fun, but it's just part of it. Every business owner I know, they've been sued, they got a labor issue. So it's just part of the deal, and learning that and getting through it, but going from 1 million to 20 million, you learn a lot, but it's all part of it, and we can get through it. And and it's not really that big of a deal, nothing to be scared of. So that was my final comment.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we're called grow my profit, is because if your profit isn't growing, you won't have some of that cushion, and you need it because there's other opportunities. And Jeff didn't like raising prices to cover the increase in employment wages, but he didn't have to like it. He just had to do it. And when he did it and he kept moving forward and he kept his eyes on the prize, he was able to have an 8-figure exit. And many of you can be doing the same type of thing. If you keep your eye on the prize, get good counsel, and you keep taking the steps, you too can grow your profit. So thanks, John. Thanks, Jeff. Have a great day.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon, man.